Now, Henry Clay in his career fought a couple of armed duels. So what was it about his service in forging compromises, in leading the House of Representatives, serving in the Senate, serving in the President's cabinet? What is it that is lacking from that service that we have right today?
Henry was not unlike a lot of other men who felt that he had to stand up for his principles, and that's an important part of what was at issue in some of those incidents. But it's also worth probably pointing out that Henry Clay was in many respects not quite the compromiser that we often remember him to be. He is referred to, as you know, as the great compromiser, but he didn't, in fact, steer the Compromise of 1820, something that's sometimes associated with him, and he didn't actually resolve the issue of 1850 when we got to the Great Compromise of 1850.
And he did push a president and a Congress into war in 1812.
Well, that's absolutely right. And so I think that understanding that he was a principled person who had various issues that he cared deeply about is an important part of putting his great reputation as a compromiser in perspective. Compromise doesn't mean unprincipled, and often it is thought of as tantamount one to the other. He was a man who cared quite deeply about a number of political issues and wasn't at all prepared to compromise on some of those issues. This is a point that I think is well made by David and Jean Heidler in their new biography on him. Instead of referring to him as a compromiser, they refer to him as an essential American. And I think that that's particularly appropriate, given that we Americans, of course, have principles that we won't compromise. But that said, we can't proceed without having the occasional meeting in the middle ground. And when you think of the triumvirate that he was part of, that Henry Clay was part of, along with John C. Calhoun and Daniel Webster, he was more inclined to align himself with Northern interests than certainly Calhoun was prepared to do, but he was always looking for ways to bring the two sides together. His principle, ultimately, was preservation of the Union. And I think it's for that reason that he was so important to Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln always referred to him as the ultimate paradigm of successful political engagement. And it was out of respect for his understanding that it's the Union that has to come first, more than anything else. That Henry Clay was really part of the generation that was following the founders and trying to perfect the Union.
What have you found over the years in terms of the resonance of Henry Clay and his career to people serving in the House, Senate administrations today?
They recognize the truly seminal effect that Henry Clay had on the power and role of the speakership. To be truthful, when we look at the current political landscape, we could use for a few more Henry Clays, people who can, in fact, move the ball forward, get things done. And America seems to be craving that kind of leadership.
What was the relationship between Henry Clay and Transylvania?
Thank you for asking. I appreciate that because we're very proud of Henry Clay, and Henry Clay was very proud of his relationship with Transylvania. He was a member of the faculty in the law department. We used to have a law school, we no longer do, but he was a very important figure in that school. He was also on the Board of Trustees. He was actually elected onto the Board of Trustees at the young age of 27, and he continued to serve until his death in 1852. So he cared very deeply about this institution. He, in fact, oversaw the construction of a building that's right in the center of campus, our administration building. It's kind of a fun story, if you don't mind the aside. James Morrison, when he died, left $20,000 of his estate, a not insignificant amount, to Transylvania University. And when Henry Clay, who was the executor to that will, very prominent lawyer, as I'm sure you know, he, in the process of diverting those funds to Transylvania, was accused by Jacksonians of embezzlement. In fact, there was a journalist, one of your predecessors, a gentleman by the name of Duff Green, a Jacksonian journalist, who accused Clay of having taken this money for his own purposes, and of course that's not what happened. He used it for construction of Old Morrison, which is the oldest building in Lexington and part of the Lexington Seal. And we have Henry Clay to thank for this grand structure because he literally oversaw the construction of the building.
And I assume that the legacy of Henry Clay has helped to shape the character of the kinds of students you attract here and the kinds of academic programs you have.
It has. I mean, Henry Clay was a very intelligent and educated person who is very similar to the kinds of students that we welcome onto our campus. In fact, just earlier today, we welcomed our new incoming first-year class. There is one other story I'd like to tell you, if you don't mind, about Henry Clay on this campus. He was a very successful lawyer, and in his various cases as a criminal lawyer, he never lost a case. He got to have the kind of reputation that when he was called upon by a gentleman whose name was Lafayette Shelby, he was the grandson of Isaac Shelby, who had been governor of Kentucky. Lafayette was accused of drunkenly murdering a gentleman right out here in the center of Gratz Park in the middle of the day. And when he needed a lawyer, he went for the best, and he got Henry Clay. And so public an issue was this case in the town of Lexington that swarms of people came from all around this city, and so many that they couldn't fit into the county courthouse. So they went looking for a place to have the case tried. And where did they settle? Right here on Transylvania's campus. It was the last case that Henry Clay ever tried, and it was in Old Morrison, the building that he oversaw the construction of.
Wow.
So, and he won his case and maintained his perfect record. So really very exciting. Thank you very much for being here, John. We appreciate it.